Hey everyone. We're really excited to have this panel discussing the Lincoln Project and how Republicans are more and more supporting the Democratic nominee and being turned away by Trump and Trumpism in all its different forms. And we're so excited to have this pretty distinguished panel, in my opinion. And the people moderating this are going to be me, myself, Charlie Stevens. I'm a student at LSU. I'm a polycom major, pretty interested in politics. Frederick Bell, he can introduce himself.
Hey, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, everyone. It's so good to be here. Thank you to Charlie and everyone at the Lincoln Project for bringing us all together for this really important discussion. My name is Frederick Bell, recent graduate of Tulane University, and I'll be moderating with Charlie. So let's get started.
Yeah, and so I think we should introduce our panelists per se. So we have James Carville. He ran a couple presidential campaigns for Bill Clinton and has been around in Democratic politics for a while and is still active on the national stage, comments on MSNBC, on several other newscasts as well. Him and Frederick are pretty close. They're laughing about that now. And then we have Stephen Handwerk. He's the longest serving executive director for a state Democratic Party in the country. He has also been involved in national talks about Democratic data and how to make it better and how to make sure Democrats can win across the country. And as we know, in 2016, that data played a big role in that race. And data played a big role in the 2019 governor's race, and it's going to play a big role in this upcoming election where we're going to need it more than ever. And then we have Bob Mann. He is the Manship Chair at the Manship School of Mass Communication at LSU. He has written several books. He's basically a political historian at this point. Written a book about LBJ and the Daisy ad, his most recent book about Ronald Reagan and his political evolution, becoming Ronald Reagan. Yeah, really cool dude. And then we have John Weaver. He's a founder of the Lincoln Project, former senior aide to John McCain, ran John Kasich's presidential campaign. Couple big time Republican strategist on the national level, and we're really lucky to have him and his expertise, the Lincoln Project. They've really been doing great work. So yeah, and now we will let them say some things about themselves. I guess I've given them a little introduction. So I guess we'll start with James.
You're muted, James.
All right, thank you. I'm going to just take for granted everyone knows who I am. What I love about this project is this. The one thing that it goes after is the one thing that can really erode Trump, and that is strong leader. People will say, well, he talks frankly, he doesn't do everybody else, he does stuff I don't like, but at least he's strong. And what this does is just fundamentally erode that south of 40% demographic. And it does it through humor, it's concise, it moves. And I'm getting these posters starting to call me that they're seeing an erosion of Trump's strong leader number. Yeah, look, 18,000 lies, 19,000 lies, they don't give a shit. You know, any of the kind of other crude stuff, they don't care. And so to say one thing, this is not a noble thing we're doing. This is a necessary thing. I mean, we were talking before the show. They're paying people to kill our soldiers. He's green lighting concentration camps of religious minorities in Western China. This is not a noble thing we're doing. This is a necessary thing. And I'm delighted and proud to be part of this. Frederick is my former student. He was at LSU. He went to Tulane. I think he had good reasons. They poached him. They're richer than us, but that's okay. And Bob Mann is my colleague also, and Charlie. So just a big, I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted to help. I'm delighted to be on the panel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, James. Stephen?
Hi, everybody. I'm Stephen Handwerk, and I have no idea why I'm here. But I am thoroughly, I can't wait to hear from three men that, quite frankly, have really shaped and I've learned from for quite some time. So I'm really glad to hear that. You know, certainly from my perspective, having the work of the Lincoln Project has been something that has been incredibly inspiring to me, because it kind of renews my faith in humanity a little bit, in seeing that people of conscience can actually stand up and do what's right. And I obviously hope that we see a lot more of that as we move forward. And more than anything, the thing that I love about it is every single one of those ads so far that we have seen cuts so deep into the things that Donald Trump cares the most about. And so that, to me, is something that, at least from the diehard political guy, I'm just absolutely loving. So I look forward to today and the conversation.
Professor Mann?
Yeah, I just want to, first of all, thanks for inviting me to be on this with a group of people that I have a lot of respect for. I want to echo something that James just said. I think this is a day that we will remember, and that is that the president's betrayal of this country has been laid bare on the front page of the New York Times. The Russians are putting bounties on our troops in Afghanistan. He's known about this since March, did nothing about it. In fact, what he did about it was invite Putin to come to the Capitol, to Camp David, and rejoin the G7. And what we're going to see today in the next couple of days is total radio silence from Republican leaders in Washington. My two members of the Senate from Louisiana will say nothing about it. They will have not an unkind word for Trump. Maybe Mitt Romney, maybe Susan Collins will furrow her brow. But what makes the Lincoln Project so valuable is that these are patriots who are standing up for American values. They're not just Republicans attacking a Republican. They are saying what Republicans, I'm sure, want to say if they felt like they could, if they weren't cowards, they would say it. But they're saying what a lot of people on their side are thinking, but don't have the courage to say. And so I tip my hat to their not just their courage, but their patriotism at this time.
Thanks so much for that. I know John calls it the Army of the Decent, so now we'll go to him.
Thanks, Charlie, and it's an honor to be with all of you. As an Aggie, I try to avoid all these LSU people, except around Thanksgiving. So it's as I reminded Charlie, we're undefeated when LSU scores 72 points against us, and we'll keep it that way. Frederick, just like you, I'm a student of James Carville. He schooled me a few times in the past, and I'm glad to be with my old friend James today, and his kind words matter. I want to talk about something that Bob just mentioned, and just when you think you can't be outraged anymore than you already are, and if you look at everything that Trump has done over the last 3.5 years, each day you become more and more outraged. And I really thought his malfeasance in dealing with COVID, which is going to cost literally the lives of over 200,000 Americans by the time we get to Election Day, was probably it. But when you find out that Putin and the Russians have paid a bounty, they don't just have a bounty, but they've paid a bounty for the killing of American soldiers in Afghanistan, and that the president was notified of this in March, and he was given a menu of responses. He chose none of those items on the menu, and instead he tried to force and insert Putin and Russia back into the G7, as Bob said. He withdrew 25,000, or he wants to withdraw 25,000 troops from Germany, something Putin has long wanted to do in the dissolution of NATO. He blew up Voice of America, which we need to revisit, right, in light of all of this. And then he had the audacity to go to West Point and stand before those that are the best of us, those young men and women at West Point, who any one of them could be assigned to go to Afghanistan, knowing that any one of them could have had a bounty on their head. And he stood there, and all he wanted to talk about, excuse my language, when he got to Tulsa, was his ultimate victory over the ramp. Okay. And so the outrage for us, and then we see nothing but silence from Republicans. I tweeted this morning to as many as I could squeeze into a tweet, Lindsey Graham and Susan Collins and Joni Ernst, the whole bunch of them. Where are they on this issue? Where are they? And, you know, as James said, none of us wanted this fight. It kind of came to us. We almost started it a year earlier, but we were talking on the phone. We were waiting for a Republican elected official to do it. Maybe 20 of them, or 10, or 5, or even just one. I mean, we didn't think that the Republican political consulting class, some of us, would be defending it. That's kind of like waiting for the bail bondsman to defend the rule of law, right, in some people's minds. But no one stepped up. And so we finally felt like we had no choice but to take on Trump. And we've all been to these salon meetings in Washington, D.C., where, you know, good people, never Trumpers, would get together and drink Chardonnay and wring their hands about the state of the party. And, you know, I come from an SEC school, okay? So our viewpoint is an asymmetrical attack on Donald Trump every day, keep him on the defensive, go after the things that really matter to him, his ego and the way he sees himself. He constantly projects what his weaknesses are, and to prosecute those enablers of his in the Senate, that it would only take 3 or 4 of them to rein him in, and they're either out of careerism or cowardice or fear of a tweet or a nickname. They've subjugated themselves to him. And in my mind, they're like passengers on the Titanic who, after the ship has hit the iceberg, gone up to Captain Smith, handcuffed themselves to Captain Smith, and thrown the key into the drink. That's the way they're conducting themselves. So we're not gonna let up. We're gonna continue to prosecute the case against Trump and try to move as many Republicans and disaffected Republicans and Republican acting independents as we can in the key electoral college states and the key U.S. Senate battleground states. And also, quite frankly, get under the president's skin, into his lizard brain, because when he's attacking John Weaver or Steve Schmidt or the Lincoln Project and turns his campaign apparatus at us, we're like PT boats in World War II, you know, and the battleship is attacking us. Meanwhile, that gives Vice President Biden, his campaign, some airspace. They can prosecute the campaign on their terms, and we can keep the president on his heels. So it's an honor to be here, Charlie. Thanks for doing this. I've long been a fan of Bob's work. He's an incredible leader in the academic space, and I've read everything he does. And Frederick, I look forward to hearing from you. You're another Carville victim, so I wonder what you have to say. Thanks, Charlie.
Thanks so much, John. And like James brought up, it's all about action instead of conference calls. So we're going to get right into the first question that Frederick is actually going to ask. So let's get to it.
Yes, thank you. So the first question is for you, Mr. Weaver. When did you first come across the idea for the Lincoln Project? And, you know, what was the initial reaction from your friends in that space that you talked about?
Okay. Steve and Rick and I first discussed it in 2017, in 2018, excuse me. But it was late in the cycle. And look, we raised some money, we returned all of it, which is kind of unknown in this business. But again, we were waiting for any Republican, any elected Republican. We didn't think that we didn't think we had the standing. We didn't think it should be coming from the consulting world or the people who worked in campaigns. We were hoping that a U.S. senator or a governor or a congressman or a precinct chairman or damn near anybody that had been elected would take up this banner, but they didn't. And so we then ultimately decided last year to launch it, which we did, as you know, in December, and it's taken off.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, so and that's great to hear. And so it's a similar question to the other panelist. When did you first hear of the Lincoln Project, and what was your first initial reaction to the group?
Is that directed at me?
Directed at everyone else, so you can go.
Well, I just sort of, people kept calling me about these Donald Trump groups. And the thing is, when I'm trying to point back television, the problem with Democratic campaign culture is we tend to embody democratic values, which means inclusion and respect for others and collegiality. And, you know, I always tell people, if you want to have big D democratic government, then you can't have small d democratic campaigns. And these guys move. I mean, you don't, everybody's political opinion is not equal. I'm sorry. And what they do is they push product. And that's what you got to do, and a lot of it. And they're performing a very valuable thing here because they got that part of Biden's flank. He doesn't need to worry about this. And the more we can get these spots out there, it's a really a legal in-kind contribution to the Biden campaign that's not subject to limits, because the more of this we can accomplish, I mean, they don't have to do with that. They don't have to deal with it. They can do their stuff and they can talk about their plans and everything else. So that's where I became, people started who I respect was saying, look at these guys, man. And I kept getting, you know, emails and texts from, you know, some of the meanest, most partisan Democrats that I know, you know, saying that how effective this was. And in that sort of really mean partisan democratic world that I live in, like, oh shit, this is good. I want to, let's get this train out the station and get our job done. That's how I came about it.
Yeah, for sure. Stephen?
Yeah, so I think the first time I heard about it when Steve Schmidt was talking about it, probably towards the end of the year or just after the first of the year. And the first thing out of my mind was, whoa, wait a second. This is something new. This is something that could actually mean something. And then hearing the names that were associated with it. You know, there's a lot of people that will joust at windmills. There's a lot of folks that will come at things and you hear about it once and then you never hear about them again. And so the sustained level of engagement that we have been seeing from John and his team that they have assembled is quite amazing. And that's what got me to not only first pay attention, but then to keep engaged. And now to see the types of ads that they are producing that literally talk to individuals with the credibility. You know, I think that the best thing that you know, from our side that we can't replicate, and James just hit on it a little bit, this is talking to individuals that quite frankly will never listen to me. They'll probably not listen to James. These are individuals that we're cutting through because it's coming to them from in language that they understand and are used to hearing from, and it actually means something, so they're paying attention. So that's probably how I first became aware and got excited.
Great. Professor Mann?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I follow John and Schmidt and others who are involved in the Lincoln Project on Twitter, and I think I saw it first on Twitter. And my only observation, my only addition to this part of the conversation is that it struck me that they were the first people of that stature to engage in a way that I mean, this field was open to someone to do this. I mean, there was a huge vacuum on that side of the spectrum. And when they all got together, when George Conway John Weaver, Steve Schmidt, and the rest of them got together, if any one of them had been doing what they're now doing, that would have been significant. When they all joined forces, that said to me that this is something of an order of magnitude much greater than anything we've seen or will see. And I think it's proven to be that. It's remarkable that they've done so much with so little. I mean, they're living off the land in a lot of ways. I think John can elaborate on that, but they've had an impact that is, they're punching way above their weight with this, and they're getting an enormous amount of attention for a little bit of expenditure of money and ads on paid advertising, which I think is just remarkable and shows just how creative and clever the work they're doing is, which I can elaborate on later.
Hey, Charlie, can I respond to something that James said?
Yeah.
I mean, we're fortunate because we don't have a candidate that we have to respond to. We don't have a candidate spouse that we have to report to, which I know we don't have a kitchen cabinet. We don't have a finance committee. We don't have a political organization like the RNC or the DNC. We only have ourselves. And so we're completely unfettered. It speeds things up. And look, if we screw up, we'll put a different ad out the next day. We'll just keep moving. And I think that freedom to move and to constantly harass and blow up supply lines, we're enjoying it, but it's because we don't have the structure that a lot of typical efforts have. It's just something we can just honor among ourselves. So.
Well, that moves us to our next question, and thank you all for chiming in on that. What do you think how have the dynamics changed at all in the race? We saw recently a lot of the polls, especially New York Times Siena poll, showed Joe Biden up by 10 points on Trump. Do you think that the work that the Lincoln Project is doing has had a big impact on that?
Who is that directed to?
That's directed to all
Mr. Weaver?
Okay, well, look, I think we see ourselves as the point of a spear in a grand coalition, like center right to far left, right? And we want to be the point of the spear. If we can make any marginal difference, that's good for us. I will say there was a survey just this week in Wisconsin. The same poll a month ago had Biden up 2 or 3. He's now up 9. And in that survey, Trump's approval rating among Republicans had dropped 10 points, and those people had moved to Biden. And we've been up there. We've advertised up there in the suburbs in Wisconsin, and we're taking the case there. But
Yeah,
one thing
that's that Marquette Law School poll, which, by the way, is the
that's
gold
right.
standard. That's not some bullshit poll. That's the gold standard in Wisconsin.
That's right. Yeah. It's and look, the other thing is, if you think the conventions are halftime, so we're like nearing halftime of this race. We want to fucking put the score down. Excuse my language. We want to put the score in, right? We want to stay on offense. And, I think some Democrats and some of our allies are worried that the race may tighten. What's going to happen when it tightens? What's going to happen? Is he going to come back? Can't think about that. You put the pedal down. When Republicans right now are starting to move away from Trump because a whole host of issues, most of which James had talked about, that's when it's time to convert. You stay on offense constantly. There's no prevent defense. There's none of that. And if he's starting to bleed in Georgia and Texas and North Carolina and Florida, Iowa, et cetera, press the attack in those states. Don't let up. That's how you make states winnable. You keep pressing your advantage constantly. If we have any small measure in that, it's just to keep the president on defense and keep his campaign off track. We want to be a marauding force constantly and make him bleed in suburbs and among college-educated white men and women and among working class whites primarily, but we're going after a broader audience too. So to answer your question.
The one thing that I'd like to point out on this is, which I think is incredibly important as well, is the subliminal part of this. You guys are giving permission for conservatives to be able to agree with you. And I think that is perhaps maybe the largest part of the largest benefit of this is being able to give conservatives a safe space. And that's probably using too warm, fuzzy language, but being able to give them that, oh, wait a second, I'm not the only one that feels this way. I'm not the only one that can voice my opinions on this. And so I think that that's perhaps maybe the biggest thing that you're doing for the conversation.
Well, Republicans are hierarchical, right? Like a Rotary Club or a Lions Club. Democrats are more along the way Will Rogers described it. Okay, so, but Republicans are hierarchical. They need a permission slip, as you put it. They need to see some structure so that they are not alone when they leave the tribe, right? You know, so that's, to echo your point, that's what we're trying to do in some ways, yes.
John, you know, the other day I was reading something that Stuart Spencer, who, for those who are familiar with political history, was Ronald Reagan's, his first and longtime political consultant, political advisor. He told someone, I read that, he said, when you run a TV ad against an incumbent, the first ad should be just a little bit wrong. And what he meant by that was you wanted it to be just a little wrong to force the incumbent to respond to it in a way that he or she shouldn't. And that's, I'm not saying the Morning in America spot was wrong in some way, but you forced Trump to respond to it. And that, to me, seems to be the moment when the whole game changed with the Lincoln Project. Is that the way you look at it?
Well, that's fair. I mean, and I agree with Stu, who's been a mentor to me. He's a really good person. Look, we produced that ad. You know, it took us about 3 weeks to kind of get the art of that one. Some things we turn around more quickly, but to add the "you" into morning, you know, took a little bit of, you know, a little whiskey and a little thought. But then one of our people had a good idea of spending $5,000 on Tucker Carlson in Washington, D.C. with the thought that Trump would see it. And Trump did see it. And why the President of the United States is up at 1:30 in the morning, tweet attacking political consultants is another question for another day, perhaps. But we raised $2 million off of that attack on us, which we then turned around and plowed into Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania. So in many ways, Trump's been our biggest bundler for the Lincoln Project.
Isn't Stewart an Ole Miss guy?
What?
Isn't you know Ole Miss guy, Stewart?
Well, Stuart Stevens is Ole Miss guy. Yep.
Yeah. Look, I'll make a larger point here. We're going to beat Trump. Trump is going to lose the fucking election. All right. The question is, do we beat Trumpism? Because if we just beat Trump, Biden, you know, at least we'll have competent ambassadors and things like that, and we won't have a trade in them. And that's a big change. That's good. It's better to go from a traitor to a patriot. But if you eradicate the entire idea that this is just a place and one person's success depends on another person's failure, then you've done something important. And the only way to do that is, and I can't tell you the number, it's double digits, which is aspirational but attainable, where no one wants to pick this up again. You know, I was watching I love these documentaries, wartime documentaries, and I was looking at these German soldiers after Stalingrad, and they were beaten, they were vacant, they were starving, they were freezing, they had nothing left. All right, that's what I want to see on election night, where just no one wants, then we can go back and we can fight over the freaking Keystone Pipeline or whatever shit we were doing before all this happened to us. All right, but until we eradicate this, and you know, I think every Republican is sort of pulling for this because everybody wants to get off of this, but the only way to get off of it is to attack, and win this thing by double digits. And right now, we can do that.
I couldn't agree more.
Everything. Winning big is everything.
Yeah, and so I guess that kind of brings us to like the next point. So this is like directed at everyone. do you think there's ever really been a movement like of this kind before, like organization like this? And do you think that organizations like it will continue on past this cycle?
Well, let me just say, just touch on that for a second. I'm hopeful that we can get rid of Trumpism. I agree with James that a crushing defeat across the entire body politic, across the landscape, and sweeping out as many of his enablers as possible to scare the holy crap out of the party up and down their system is vital. However, this is kind of like Night of the Living Dead. And I worry that even if we get rid of the main zombie, there are still going to be other zombies out there like Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley and Donald Trump Jr. And so I know we're not going to go away. I mean, look at the governor of Florida and this governor in Texas. They worshiped at the altar of this MAGA governor. They were afraid of tweets or nicknames, so they didn't handle the COVID crisis appropriately. You know, you could get a bus, the night bus manager in Fort Stockton, Texas, who could do a better job than they've done running a crisis. And so I think all those things have to be prosecuted well into the future. But the first thing we have to do is deliver a crushing defeat. And I hope the Democrats get in their mindset that we have to constantly be on the attack. There's no time for anything other than to press your advantage constantly.
This reminds me a little bit of what Terry Dolan and the National Conservative Political Action Committee did back in 1978, 1980, when they knocked off 4 prominent Democratic senators using guerrilla tactics, third-party advertising, third-party messages they were able to do work and say and deliver messages that the candidate, that the challenger himself could not do. And they changed politics in this country. Maybe not for better, but they definitely changed politics, and it was an innovation that hadn't really been explored until that point. I do hope that John and his colleagues are successful in doing what they want to do, because I think that, as James said, there's got to be an eradication. You can't just take Trump out. You do have to take out Trumpism, and that's why I'm happy to see them not just taking on Trump, but taking on some of his allies in the Senate as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a really important point that's being made throughout all of this, is that getting rid of Trump doesn't solve the problem. And I think everyone realizes that. So this is to Stephen. As a state Democratic Party executive director in the South, how do outside organizations like the Lincoln Project help the work you do in electing Democrats, and is it working?
Yeah, well, and I guess we'll continue to be able to see. I mean, at the end of the day, one of the things that I think for the Democratic Party and those that are out there working on our side of the fence is that I've always believed that, as a Democratic Party leader, we've got to give our candidates the space in order for them to be able to win an election. And one of the things that I can say is that, with John Bel Edwards, we were able to get behind him, and not only were we able to win in the first round when nobody thought we could, and then turn around and win his reelection. And that was because we let John Bell be John Bell. Going back to West Wing analogy, for those who remember that, by allowing him to do that, giving him the space, it was important for us as the Democratic Party to adopt several things. Number one, we had to dig in on message discipline and making sure that we were not causing him more issues with the alliance, with the coalition that our candidate was building. So we can't provide any unforced errors by forcing some sort of purity tests or items like that. I mean, at the end of the day, if it is about governing like we say it is, then you can only govern if you win the darn election. So we have to be able to adopt more. For those people that are in my position in leading party organizations, we are tempted to go to the loudest voices in our community. And while we always have to be pushing for change and evolution in our party to become better at who we are, to be able to be better at advocating for our friends and our allies and the people that need it, we can't do it on the altar of sacrificing ourselves to lose elections. So I guess bringing this back to the Lincoln Project, and what is so inspiring about this is that I really hope that Democrats don't screw this up, that we can actually be here as a party, staying united, staying focused on the discipline that we have to do in order to be able to win this election. And look, this year is going to be unlike any other election cycle we have ever been through. This organizing, the work that we do in connecting with voters, talking with voters, is going to be completely different. So we have to do that, and we have to allow our candidates to be able to build the space so that the John Weavers and the Steve Schmidts of this world can actually provide that messaging, and then we don't go and undercut it.
Thanks so much, Stephen. And I wanted to remind everyone that we have a Q&A section for the audience members. We have 120 or so participants who are tuning in. So please put your questions into the Q&A box, not the chat box, and we'll read through those. We have about 3 more questions that we'll read to our panelists, and then we'll open it up to everyone. So this goes to Professor Mann. You have written several political history books, with one of them featuring the iconic LBJ Daisy ad, credited with destroying the Goldwater campaign. Do you think an ad could have the same impact today, and why?
Well, yes and no. I mean, in 1964, you had 3 television networks. It was just so much easier to get a message out there. I mean, the Daisy Girl spot showed one time, and 40 million people saw it. But the thing about Daisy Girl was that it went viral, and the force of it was not just that it aired that one time, but that it aired several other times in its entirety later in the week on the national news, and it had that third party validation and that reach to it. If Daisy Girl had run in today's world, it would have been all over YouTube, and it would have gotten millions of views. It truly would have gone viral. And so that's what I think is the similarity between what the Lincoln Project is doing and Daisy Girl is. I see really 3 pieces of DNA of Daisy in their work. It's particularly the Morning in America spot, which I think is just brilliant. Number one, they don't give the audience a lot of information. They use the information the audience already has and puts the audience to work, which is pretty brilliant. That's what you really want to do. You want to spark people to use info and feelings they already have, and help put those into context to them, but let people draw their own conclusions. One of the brilliance of the Daisy Girl spot was, part of it was that it prompted Barry Goldwater and the Republicans to scream and start, accusing Johnson and his ad people of being unfair. They prodded the target, in this case, Trump, to respond in ways that gave the spot much more attention. There's a Politico story this morning. I'm looking at my notes. I wrote this down. The Politico story describes the Lincoln Project as a squatter in Trump's mental space, and I think that's what they are. They're in his head, and he's responding to them in ways that have, as John has already talked about, has magnified their reach and helped them raise a lot of money. And third, what they're doing is getting a lot of media coverage. It's getting a lot of attention. The media is covering it. And that not only amplifies their message, but it's that validation, that third-party validation. It's not just their message out there on YouTube, but it's also a message that's being mediated through, in the news by people that readers and viewers respect. So I think all these most of what they're doing, but particularly Morning in America, which I think is just brilliant, has that DNA of Daisy in it, and I'm really eager to see. I know they've got a lot of other ways to crawl into Trump's brain up their sleeve, and I'm really eager to see what they come up with.
Yeah, And this is, and you hit on a lot of great points, Professor Mann. And we have one last like pre-written question, I guess you could call it, and this is like to whoever thinks they want to answer it. What do you think the long-term effect on the Republican Party will be from Trumpism and groups like the Lincoln Project? Do you think there will be like a split in the party? Like, how does this like affect them in the long term?
Well, I mean, we don't know yet that answer, right? There is a need in this country for a center-right party, but one that deals with truth, has enough self-awareness, and dealing with issues that are impacting people today, climate change, for example, and being pro-science and believe in math and all the things that that should be part of a political party. But until the Republicans understand that this is not 1950s and that the demographics of the United States reflect today's society, until that they move away from the angry white guy and understand that they have to be in the entire marketplace of ideas, the party won't grow. Okay, it's in a demographic box canyon now of their own choosing, and young voters, Black voters, Hispanic voters, Asian Americans, people from all walks of life, they don't want to be associated with this party. No corporation, Coca-Cola, Burger King, what have you, nobody would go down and say, give me the most narrow demographic group that's older and dying off, and I want to market to them. I mean, who the hell would do that? And that's what the Republican Party has done. And it's been made worse because of Fox News and the poison on Facebook and the self-selected or forced algorithms into these echo chambers. Ultimately, there will be a center-right party that reflects society. When that's going to come, I don't know. We have one mission in front of us, so we don't want to get distracted by it, and that's kicking the shit out of Trumpism. So we'll worry. We'll let somebody else worry about that.
Frederick, you're on mute.
Oh, you're muted, James. I was trying to tell James he's muted.
I gotta ask John a question. A reporter called me yesterday and said the Trump people answer they send him all kind of stuff, and the Biden people like never answer the attacks. And I said, look, the Trump campaign is like a basketball team that keeps shooting at your goal. Don't stop them.
Right.
Keep going. Everything. I mean, there's a 70-30 issue, and they picked the 30. So
Right.
Why do you want to guard someone who's shooting at your goal?
Well, I mean, look at this issue on healthcare. The Republicans just had their asses handed to them in the 2018 midterm on healthcare. Now we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're in a recession. People are losing their healthcare, and the Trump administration is going to the Supreme Court to have healthcare taken away from millions of people. What the hell? Getting back to the 80-20 rule.
Out of me in Texas in 1984, and I learned a lot, and I put it in my book. By the way, the education of James Carville wasn't Henry Adams, but it happened in Texas in 1984. But we didn't win, but at least we tried to win.
Very good. Now we'll move to some of the audience questions if none of the other panelists had something to add to the conversation. All right.
The people.
From the people. And this comes from Mr. Trent Garrett. What do the Lincoln Project signatories expect to get from a Joe Biden administration in a hyper-partisan environment?
We don't expect anything other than having a good and decent man as president so we can get back to our lives.
Very good.
Yeah, and I'm going to, so another audience question is, so this is, I don't know who it came from, but I would like the panelists to speak on how did we get to the point of Trumpism. I remember the days when Democrats and GOP agreed on the problem, but had different ways of solving.
How about the historian?
Well, there'll be books. There already are books written on this, and I think we're still trying to figure out exactly what happened, what brought us to here. I won't go into it because I mean it's a 3-hour conversation just getting started. I would just say that I think that Trumpism is a symptom, and it's not Donald Trump. Donald Trump didn't bring us to where we are. He just took advantage of the conditions that were there, and I think that the ground was tilled and fertilized long before Trump came along. He just understood what to do with it.
You know, I'm old enough to remember a time where we would not ever use the word lie. We would never say that our opponent lied. We would say that they're misremembering. We would turn ourselves into a pretzel to not go that hard, right? There was this agreement that we had on how politics were to be conducted. And now, when lies are more prevalent than any sort of truths, where it's constantly coming at us, I mean, you guys, I'm looking forward to the day that the White House is boring, that breaking news, president wears a tan suit, gets the headlines and gets us sidetracked for an entire week, that the first lady daring to wear a sleeveless dress is the consternation of the nation. I want to go back to those days, because living in this constant state of crazy is something that is not good for us as a nation. It's certainly not good for my health, and I'm tired of having to color out my grays.
Stephen, I want to add what you just said. I think is important, and I think it was a vital aspect of this. I think the political press in this country has been broken for a while, and we could again talk about that for 3 hours. But I think that the way the press covered Trump in 2016 was just malpractice. I'll never forget watching MSNBC of all networks for 30 minutes or an hour of just an empty podium waiting for him to come out and eventually disavow his birtherism, which he never really quite did. But they gave him they allowed him to inject his racism and his ideology right into our bloodstream, and I'm not sure the press at large has really reckoned with that yet.
But what about the emails, Bob?
No, to James's point there, and what you said, I was running John Kasich's campaign before. We had a hard time getting oxygen, as you can imagine. But just 2 weeks ago or a weekend ago, MSNBC and CNN ran 4 straight hours in Tulsa anticipating Trump's rally. Now, they didn't know it was going to be a disaster, right? They were anticipating his rally. That's 4 hours on both networks straight through, okay? And I just find this reprehensible behavior on their part, quite frankly. And I don't think they've learned their lessons. And if you ever criticize a reporter for any of their coverage of Trump now or in 15 and 16, they go straight into a defensive posture that's telling.
Look, the stupid Charlemagne, you're not black if you don't like me. MSNBC covered that thing. I said, I'm not getting into this. What he should have said is what J.C. Watts' dad said. A black person voting for Republicans like a chicken voting for Colonel Sanders. Okay? But I mean, maybe you call it a gaffe and maybe inelegant, apologize for it 15 minutes later. And just people that are out there, you don't have to answer this shit.
You don't. Right? Do not.
Just move on. Because once they engage, then they love to do that kind of stuff. And Biden's going to make, I said the other night, every candidate makes mistakes. Bill Clinton might be the best politician of our lifetime.
Yeah.
We had a shovel brigade behind him cleaning up shit. Yeah. Right? Everybody's, Bible says a just man sins 7 times a day.
Right.
The best candidate goes up a lot. So we can't fall into, with Biden, it's an income. No, just don't let them lapse into their old habits.
Very nice. Now, we have a question that
I think really sort of gets to the heart of what has been discussed about eradicating Trumpism, and it not just being with Trump, but it's really been a global movement. So this comes from an Eaton Manor. If I could add something to what you said about eradicating Trump, not just Trumpism, Trump is a part of a global movement of populist anti-democratic leaders and movements. Do you see yourselves getting involved, helping, giving advice to the candidates, challenging Trump-like leaders in countries from Poland to Hungary to Israel, where this person is from? Do you see yourselves as a part of the movement challenging authoritarian leaders around the world?
Well, yeah, look, we have a job in front of us here, but clearly there's a rise of white nationalism and authoritarianism that are attacking the liberal democracies throughout Eastern and Western Europe and in Australia and elsewhere. And all of us should be united in helping push back on that. That's obviously a trend. And look, one of Trump's main backers, Steve Bannon, he's over in Italy with some sort of quote unquote white nationalist think tank that's been funded by Russian oligarchs to cause nothing but trouble within the EU and our NATO allies. I mean, at some point, yes, somebody needs to get involved in that, but we got to end it here at home first.
I've worked in Brazil. How's it going down there?
Not too well, is it?
No, he may not make. I still, so I'm worked in 22 different countries in campaigns over the course of my life, and I'm 75, and I'm probably retired, traveling to Indonesia for a while.
Yep.
So, with me and Frederick both being young people, I think it's important to ask this question. So there's an audience question from Joshua Broomfield, and it says, especially in lieu of recent protests and the importance to winning the election, what is being done to reach out to the youth vote, and what are the expectations for youth turnout in 2020?
Frederick, you're involved in South Carolina. What's going on there? Y'all doing anything?
Well, are we involved in South Carolina? We will be, yeah, for sure.
No, Frederick's involved, aren't you? You've been there?
Yeah, I am involved. I actually saw a question about getting rid of Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham in South Carolina, working remotely anyway, for Jamie Harrison and other Democrats running for office up and down the ticket. So, we're doing what we can to get out the vote. And I think a lot of young people recognize the importance of this moment, especially with all the racial tension and injustice and inequity that many people, or at least some people, have now woken up to. And I think this election is really going to be a referendum on all of that has been bubbling up for so long. Good thing we have the Black Lives Matter movement that was sort of waiting to sort of capture all this attention. And hopefully, people see Trumpism as just a sort of a buttressing all of that that we're trying to defeat. So, it's a lot of work to be done, but we're doing it.
Well, with COVID, I got to tell you, from my standpoint, COVID is having one benefit, and I don't even want to call it really a benefit, but it's really forcing the Democratic Party to look at our campaign tactics. One of the things that Trump's team did that bested us, it wasn't necessarily on the data that they had that was different or that, their data was better. It was utilizing social media as a tool to be able to get their message out there, to be able to communicate. So this has certainly made it, given us space for us forcing Democrats to move some of our organizing to the digital space. And certainly we're learning a lot from young folks in that regard. So Frederick, directly to your question, we're having a lot of young folks actually lead us on this, teach us how the better ways of doing this are. And I think that we can learn a lot from you guys in figuring out the ways that we can actually get to voters and have those conversations that we know need to happen, but they may not be able to happen on the doors, at least not safely.
Let me just say something about South Carolina. I think Jamie is running a really great campaign. And one of the reasons that blowing out Donald Trump and getting his negatives as high as possible is that the national atmosphere will push the blue wave a little bit further than it normally might go. Okay. And the further that wave can go, the more likely you're going to win in states like South Carolina and Iowa and Alaska and Montana and maybe Kansas and Kentucky. So all of this fits together. They're all intertwined together. The campaign that Jamie, with Frederick's help, running in South Carolina, will be on the cusp of winning that. And that's why everything that all of us are doing matters. Whether you're in Louisiana or Texas or not, it has an impact, in Charleston or Columbia just as well.
And so I was reading through the audience questions, and I think this one's actually really interesting. It's from Alex Pereira, and says, what are the prospects of eroding support for Trump among the roughly 35 to 40% electorate that unwaveringly supports the president? What should we expect from his base in the case that Biden wins in November?
Well, I mean, look, here's who we're going after first. College-educated Republican women. We already see them moving away from him in droves. That's one of the reasons he's now up by, the vice president is up, 12 to 14 points, depending on what survey you see. We're making inroads among college-educated white men. And then we need to take the top off of the working class whites. In the modern era, and Bob can speak to this, we saw landslides really in the post-World War II era, from Eisenhower to Lyndon Johnson to Nixon to Reagan, and et cetera. And you saw the middle move around a lot. But in the post-Reagan era, modern politics, a 10, 12-point win is a blowout, will be a massive landslide. And that's really what we have to strive for. I think Trump's base, hardcore base, is around 30%. But you got to remember, when Dick Nixon left, on the day he left the White House in 1974 in August, he still had 27% support among the American people, mostly Republicans. It's very hard to get down below 38, 36%. And so I think we're at that point where we are.
Really, there's a really interesting question from a Dustin Brewster.
Can I go back to something what John was saying, please?
Oh yeah, please.
Okay. First of all, we saw minus 10% deterioration in Wisconsin.
Yes.
All right. So
Yep.
the fundamentals are starting to go down.
Yep.
I'm involved with a project. We're raising, $75, $80 million for 77 counties in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania.
Right.
And one of the things is we can't say the Trump voters are dumb. I'll tell you who the dumbest goddamn people in America are Trump donors. They giving that money to the campaign and they're skimming everything. They're driving Ferraris, they're buying condos. They're doing, the whole convention is nothing but a giant Ponzi scheme. And we can keep going after these voters. And you're already starting to see it.
Yep.
And once you get that strong number down, once they think he is weak, they will start leaving. And John is right. You're starting to see it. We do so much metrics and data and consumption studies. You wouldn't believe it because we have a lot of donors. And we're starting to see the same thing. Of course, it's going to happen on females before it happens to males. It's going to happen to some people more than other people's. But this sort of monolithic idea that all rural whites are the same is just idiot. I'm a rural white. I'm different than a lot of other people. And we are starting to see, you can even see it in the public data. We're certainly seeing it in our data, which is pretty pristine, that the cracks are starting to emerge. And there's stuff that's going on. I mean, what the Lincoln Project is doing, what we're doing. Bob Rubin and them are spending, I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars just in Florida alone.
Right.
I mean, there's so much stuff that's going on away from the ball out here. You can't imagine it. And, there's at the Battle of Chattanooga, Grant was in commands at the base of Missionary Ridge, and it wasn't going well on the flanks. And all of a sudden, the city soldiers start charging up Missionary Ridge. And Grant looked at Rawlins and he said, who ordered those soldiers up there? He said, nobody, General. They just went. It was actually Arthur MacArthur, who was Douglas MacArthur's father, who won the Medal of Honor. All right. We're all Arthur MacArthur. We ain't waiting on orders from headquarters.
Right.
We're going. And,
Yeah,
and that's what the whole message of this campaign is. I'm not waiting for somebody from Delaware to call me.
Yeah, that's
And the attitude we got.
James, the attitude in our, we say it, we're in a race to the Rhine, you know, from the World War II. We're in a hurry. We make sure we have supplies to race to the Rhine, you know, to beat back Trump. And there is so much going on, as he said, his organization, so many other organizations. What you see publicly or on Twitter or whatever, that's just the tip of the iceberg, what's happening out there. You know, just the tip of the iceberg.
You know, you think about it, like you're a campaign manager, I was a campaign manager, and it was a big kind of command structure. And, you know, the world's different now. It is, my brother is a contractor in Baton Rouge. He doesn't own a shovel.
Right.
Everything is stubs.
Yep.
And that's more the model that campaigns are going to, is the kind of super, you know, powerful campaign manager that calls everybody in and dresses everybody down and screams orders at everybody. That's just not the way the political world is emerging. Man, somebody ought to do a book on that. That some of these political scientists on how the basic structure. I mean, you think the Black Lives Matter people are waiting for anything Joe Biden got to say? I don't think so.
Well, you know, the structures are flat, and it's about speed and agility.
Right.
Oh, well, speaking of structure, there's a question I want to bring up from Mr. Dustin Brewster. All the Lincoln Project ads are absolutely genius, but the Jurassic Park harmonica ad with Trump coming off of Marine One is just perfect. So, Mr. Weber, who's the genius that came up with this ad? And the second question is, what's the importance of these ads that really take the gloves off and go where most organizations and campaigns usually don't?
Yeah. Well, we huddle up every day, and then as the news happens, but look, we get ideas over the transom because, you know, we're not, I don't say anything to the political consulting union, but we get a lot of good ideas from other people. And we have young people involved with us, the people that run our digital program, young guy, smart guy, and they came up with that idea, you know, and turned it around really fast. So that's how it happens.
Wow. Wow.
You know, the thing that talking about technology, the thing that, and John can respond to this, I'm sure, that 30, 40 years ago, if you wanted to produce an ad like that, how many days would it have taken, John, as opposed to what you can do now with on a laptop?
4 or 5 days, right? Yeah.
Now you can churn that out on a laptop in a couple of hours and have it online 30 minutes later.
Well, and getting back to James's point, you know, he was in obviously a famous war room. Everybody was there. You know, we're in a pandemic. We're all in, you know, somebody's in Tallahassee, somebody's in Rock Hill, South Carolina, somebody's in Utah, I'm in Austin. You know, we're scattered around the country, but thanks to technology, we're able to operate with speed and agility and use the brain power of a lot of young people who understand communication skills over different platforms.
If I could, guys, I'd like to ask a question actually of certainly of John, but of James and even Bob. I'd love to know, what advice do you have to us in the Democratic Party to prevent something like this Trumpism happening on our side? What are the warning signs we should be looking for, and what should we be doing now to prevent that from happening on our side?
Well, you don't need a Republican, either a former Republican, giving you guys advice. But the one thing I wouldn't put up with is intolerance. And I did see it in your Democratic primary where there was intolerance on the left. And there's where you cannibalize your own. You know, you can't do that and win. And that happened on our side. And, you know, the cannibals took over, right? So if you get on the back of a tiger, you know, be careful what happens. That's my only counsel.
James, you're muted. You're muted.
sorry, my point is tyranny is tyranny. It
Yeah.
does not matter where it comes from.
Yep.
All right. I'm sorry. You know, the Soviet Union was tyranny. They had no freedom. It's tyranny. And I hope, you know, I think Biden is not, understands that. And I think the people around him do. But that's my general point on that.
Well, this sort of gets to the, excuse me, this sort of gets to part of Stephen's question, talking about folks on the fringes and not taking over the party, third parties. And we saw what happened in 2016, where third party candidates may have had an outsized effect on the election there. So is the Lincoln Project worried about voters being disaffected, not participating at all, or voting third party and not voting for Biden and maybe handing Trump?
Yeah, well, you know, this is a binary, in our mind, this is a binary choice between good and evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's not a real third party candidate that I'm worried about per se. Ideally, if every Republican that we move will vote for Joe Biden, but if they don't vote, if they move and don't vote for Trump, that's a victory of sorts. It's a better victory if they vote for Vice President Biden and for your guy and other Democratic candidates. We'll take small victories. We want bigger ones, right? But I'm not worried this cycle about a Jill Stein type or any of that. I'm really not really worried about that.
You know, we're at war. And
Yeah.
Churchill famously said, if Hitler invaded hell, I would ally with the devil. Okay?
Exactly.
This is where we are.
Yeah.
Okay? But we can settle all this shit at Potsdam or whatever it is. We might never settle it. We'll just go back to fighting with each other, but that's okay. At least we'll be fighting with each other, has a president that is an actual patriot.
Yeah.
Which has been pretty common in American history until this.
Hell, I'm an Aggie and I'm on with a bunch of goddamn LSU people. So how much more coalition do you need?
Oh, we beat the shit out of y'all this year.
Big talk.
Got your athletic director too.
I mean, I think we'll all talk about the defending national champions right here. But I think it's about time to like wrap up. So I think if we could all like give some like final thoughts and final like things to say, that'd be great. So whoever wants to go first.
I'd like to start, and I want to ask a question of John.
Okay.
I think about this all the time. If you know, I have some friends who have relatives who have seen the names of their great grandfathers come off of buildings and statues come down or being threatened to come down, and you know they're reckoning with their grandfather's racism or the accusations of racism. What would you say to, for example, my Senator Bill Cassidy, my Senator John Kennedy, about their legacy? How do you get Republicans right now who are really just worried about the next election to care about maybe what their grandchildren and great-grandchildren might think of what they did during this moment?
That's a good question, Bob. I think about that constantly. I was just watching a video earlier. I have two stories here to tell you. A video earlier, the A&M quarterback, Kellen Mond, who's a really fine young man, both of his parents were in the military, in the U.S. Army. He's an outstanding person, will be a great leader in whatever field he goes. He led a demonstration at A&M because we have a statue in front of our academic building of a gentleman who was a Confederate leader, okay, and it needs to come down. And there were a lot of old white Aggies there, and it was an ugly scene and all of that. And my son was watching it, and he couldn't comprehend why anybody would care about the statue, right? It should come down. As you learn more and grow in life, you should do that. We're trying to give people a permission slip. Sometimes you can't shame them, right? Because that doesn't work. You know, we're contemplating ads that don't open with an attack on Trump, but leads them into a conclusion. with, as you said, things in their own mind's eye about life that gets them to that point. We were on a phone call with a Hollywood director earlier this week about something similar, going after white voters so that they can become more reflective. So I don't know about that, but there's a hopeful thing. In 2000, the Confederate flag was an issue in South Carolina in the Republican primary, and I was running John McCain's, insurgent campaign against Bush, and we were in New Hampshire, and we were about to go on. John was about to go and face the nation, and look, we were getting outspent by Bush like 40-1, and the last thing I wanted to do was take up a battle in our primary over the flag, and we convinced John to give a weaselly answer on the flag issue. And he read it as if he was still in Hanoi. It looked like a hostage tape. And he said, "Here, take the fucking thing," when it was over, and handed it to me. Well, after we got beat by Bush later in the spring, he calls me and he says, "Johnny, arrange for us to go to South Carolina. We're going to go down and do the right thing and apologize for doing the political thing and not the right thing in regard to the flag." And he did, and we need more of that, not just in politics, but we need more of that in our homes and our churches and our businesses, where we're able to reflect and admit that we made a mistake, that we took the expedient way out and the easy way out. We're a long ways from that. Slavery and race relations with the original sin in our country, and we're still dealing with it, and we will for a long time. But until people can reflect and have some self-awareness, we won't get there. But I feel better today in the wake, the sad murder of Mr. Floyd and what's happened in this country, and the unity that we're seeing among a vast majority of Americans than I ever have.
So, Frederick has been multiple times, as his Bob, every place in Mississippi.
Yeah.
And the president of Mississippi State, whose Republican pedigree is about as deep as you can get. He was Thad Cochran's chief of staff. He ran the Ag Committee. He was Deputy Secretary of Agriculture in the Bush administration. His wife was Carl Rose, chief of staff. We talked last night, and they're probably within 1 or 2 votes of a 2/3 majority in the state legislature to change the flag. I mean, they're keeping their fingers crossed. I mean, that is how rapid that the kind of change that we're looking at is coming. I mean, think about that. And I mean, he is working day and night. And you just, if you would have told any of us that Mississippi was going to get on the verge of a 2/3 majority in the state legislature.
Right.
I went through it in Georgia, where when I was working with Zell Miller, we proposed it. We almost lost re-election on it. Roy Barnes did it, and he lost re-election because of it. Frederick and I had a conversation. If we wouldn't have taken these monuments down in New Orleans, there would have been dead people. Somebody would have gotten so mad, would have tried to climb up the column at Lee Circle, Bob Mann shaking his head because he knows that's true.
Yeah.
The impact of public policy means something. It really does. And and a point I make to my students, if symbolism doesn't count, then why in the fuck did they go to the trouble to put it up in the first place? Somebody thought it mattered.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's like a really interesting discussion topic, but I don't want to keep everyone here too long. So if we could all give our final thoughts, and we can wrap this up. I think it's been a really great discussion. I think I don't want to speak for Frederick, but I think we've both had a great time moderating it, and y'all have all been great.
Frederick and Charlie, thank you, and Stephen and Bob. I'm big fans of y'all's work, and James is, in the political consulting world, there are iconic figures that you look up to and you admire. And the thing about James, I said this in a tweet, he probably didn't see it, that he was our spirit animal of the Lincoln Project. So it's sort of a mascot in the way he conducts himself. And I wanted to say to people who are involved in politics or just listening in or or what have you before you get on with your day, fight. What did you do today that made a difference in defeating Donald Trump and the people who enable him? What did you do today? Because it's about, as a campaign manager and training, it's about winning every day. It's about winning every platform in what you do. And it's about winning every week. If you do all those things, you ultimately will win in November. And we can raise more money, and we can send out more tweets, and we can make more virtual phone calls. We can do all those things, but you can't get back time. Okay? You can't get back today. So whatever you do, do something today that makes a difference in getting rid of this, because our country will not survive 4 more years of Donald Trump. It will not survive it as we know it to be. And we have an obligation to these young guys, you know, Frederick and Charlie and everybody else, to leave a country for them to improve upon, you know? So that's all I have to say. And it's been a pleasure to be with you guys.
I'll echo what John just said. First of all, thanks to Charlie and Frederick for organizing a great discussion. It's been an honor to be here with Stephen and James and John. You know, I think that this is one of those moments that if you're a young person or in your 30s or 40s, 20, 30, 40 years from now, people will ask you, what did you do in 2020? Well, what did you do when, as John said, the future of the nation was at stake? People will ask you, your grandchildren will ask you, what did you do? And they're not just going to ask you who you voted for. They're going to want to know, what did you do? And that's why I admire so much what John and his colleagues are doing, because they're putting it all on the line and they're having an enormous effect. And I just really tip my hat to you and wish you Godspeed.
Yeah, I will echo all of that. Charlie and Frederick, thank you guys so much for inviting me. I can't tell you how much I've learned today. The one parting thought that I will leave is, you know, I came up through the LGBT equality movement, and I don't know that we've, as a nation, ever saw public opinion change so much so rapidly on such things as like marriage equality so quickly. And the big cautionary tale that I will give to all of the hardcore progressives and Democrats that are listening in right now is, you've got to give people room to evolve. If we are constantly attacking individuals for opinions that they have long since retired and evolved on, we've got to be able to bring people along. And when they do evolve, we've got to reward them for that. We've got to encourage that. All of us can do better. All of us can probably look at what we're saying and thinking today, and in 10 years from now, horrifically remember these things, right? So let's give people the room to evolve on these issues so that we can all be a better society. And I hope that we're in an inflection point right now on so many different topics, especially with Black Lives Matter. It is so incredibly important to be able to give people the space to do that evolution.
This violates my philosophy. Too much time we spent on conference calls and Zoom calls. We spent too much time. Go back to fucking work, everybody. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Everyone, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for this.